The Bell, the Book, and the Spellbinder by Brad Strickland, Chapter 5. The next Saturday morning was bright and sunny. Johnny woke up early and climbed onto his bike. The town was still mostly asleep when he pedaled through. An old milk truck was making deliveries, and he saw a paper boy tossing copies of the morning paper up onto people's steps and porch roofs. But no businesses were open. Johnny crossed the bridge over the Merrimack River and rode into the part of town called Cranbrook. He turned in at the little two-story house owned by the Ferguson family. Fergie's dad was home from his sales trip because his rusty old blue Ford was parked in the driveway. Swinging off his bike, Johnny kicked down the stand and stood the Schwinn under the shade of an oak. He went up onto Fergie's front steps and settled down to wait. One way or another, Johnny was going to see Fergie this morning. He waited more than half an hour. Then he heard noises coming from inside the house. The rattle of dishes and the scraping of chairs around the breakfast table. Taking a deep breath, Johnny got up and knocked on the front door. He heard footsteps, and then the door swung open. Mrs. Ferguson stood there, looking a little startled. "Oh, Johnny," she said. "I couldn't imagine who was knocking about our door this early. Come in and have some breakfast." "Thanks, Mrs. Ferguson," mumbled Johnny. She led him into the kitchen where Fergie and his dad were sitting at the breakfast table. They looked up in some surprise. "Hi," said Johnny to Fergie as he slipped into a chair. "Hi," muttered Fergie, his face getting red. He looked sleepy and grouchy, as he usually did in the morning. Mrs. Ferguson put a plate in front of Johnny. "Here," she said. "Have some eggs, Johnny? Some sausage? I'll put in 2 more pieces of toast for you." "Thanks," said Johnny. She poured him a glass of orange juice, and Johnny tucked in. The scrambled eggs were delicious, fluffy and light, with cheddar cheese whipped into them. Mrs. Ferguson smiled at him. "Well, I'm glad you're here, Johnny." Or Mr. Ferguson smiled at him. "Well, I'm glad you're here, Johnny," he said. "Fergie and you are about as close as brothers, so I want you to hear my announcement, too. Everybody, you will be glad to know that Mr. George Ferguson is moving up in the world. Beginning 2 weeks from Monday, I'm going to be a full-time salesman for Baxter Motors right here in Dustin Heights." Mrs. Ferguson smiled at her husband. Johnny grinned and congratulated him, but Fergie just stared for a long time. "What?" he said at last. "It's true," said Mr. Ferguson proudly. "I'll have a salary, and I'll work on commission too, so I'll earn more than my basic pay whenever I sell a used car. Funny thing, I was coming back home yesterday afternoon, and my car conked out just north of Ellisboro. Just died on me. So I pulled off onto the shoulder, and then this guy in a station wagon stopped to help. Turned out to be Mr. Bill Baxter, and while we tinkered with the car, we talked. We got her running again. Mr. Baxter wiped his hands on an old towel he had in the car, shook my hand, and offered me a job. What do you think of that, eh?" Johnny stared at Fergie. His friend's face had turned white as if with shock, and he shivered the same way people do when they say a goose has walked over their grave. But Fergie took a long drink of juice and finally said, "That's great, Dad." Mr. Ferguson beamed at his son. "From now on, I can be home a lot more," he said, "and we'll finally have enough money to replace the old stove and start a savings account for you so you can build up some money for college, son." Frowning, Johnny asked, "Did you say your car broke down near Ellisboro, Mr. Ferguson?" "Yes, and it was a good thing for me that Mr. Baxter came along, because Ellisboro was just a wide place in the road. I doubt it even has a regular garage." Johnny cleared his throat. That's up in Vermont, isn't it?" "That's right," said Mr. Ferguson. Johnny didn't say anything else. After breakfast, he asked Fergie, "Hey, you want to ride out to the park and play flies and grounders or something?" Fergie shrugged. "I don't know, John, baby. I don't really feel like running after a dumb baseball. Let's just ride for a while." Fergie went outside and climbed onto his bent-up old bike. The two friends rode back across the river and cruised along beside it, past the huge old brick mills, most of them long abandoned. "Hey, that was great news your dad told us," Johnny said after a while. "Yeah," grunted Fergie. Johnny looked over to his right. Fergie was pumping along, head down, as if he had to be somewhere and was late. Fergie, is something wrong?" asked Johnny. Fergie glared at him. "What's your problem, Dixon?" His tone surprised Johnny. "Nothing. Only you've hardly talked to me at all this week. That's not like you." "Well, nothing's wrong, so lay off," growled Fergie. "I'm just fine. Everything's fine." "You know," said Johnny, trying to change the subject, "I read something funny about that little town where your dad's car broke down. Ellisboro, wasn't it? You know the name you asked Professor Childermass about? That Jarman Thanatos? Leave me alone, shouted Fergie. He wheeled his bike and headed back, whizzing along the cracked street. Surprised, Johnny slowed and turned and tried to follow him. No use. Fergie was too far ahead and was much stronger than Johnny, so he easily outdistanced his friend. Johnny turned onto Fergie's street just in time to see Fergie hop off his bike, letting it crash to the ground. Fergie leaped up the steps and disappeared inside the house. The door slammed. With his heart sinking, Johnny rode back to Fillmore Street. It seemed to him as though he had lost one of his oldest friends. Fergie pounded up the stairs to his room. He closed the door behind him and threw himself onto his bed, clenching his fists. What was Dixon trying to do, asking him about Jarman Thanatos and shooting his mouth off about Mr. Ferguson's new job? It wasn't fair. Johnny's dad was special, a fighter pilot who had been shot down behind enemy lines in the Korean War. After his daring escape to an American base, he had even featured in an issue of Life magazine. Why should Dixon care if Fergie's dad had a decent job at last? It wasn't any of his concern. And for that matter, what right did Professor Childermass have to stick his big fat red nose in Fergie's business? They were hypocrites, all of them, that was it. Oh, they pretended to like you and be your friend, but behind your back they were always making fun of you, or thinking up ways of cutting you down. Well, he was through with all that. If the book could make one wish come true, it could make another, and by the time he was finished, Fergie sat up in bed, his throat dry. What was it the book said about there being a price for his wishes? Was the price losing all his friends? He got up and shoved the chair over to the closet. He took the book down and began to leaf through from the front, but he couldn't find the page with the words about his father on it. In fact, as he frantically turned the thin, opaque pages, he couldn't read any of the writing. Strange figures covered the pages, squiggly foreign letters like Arabic or Russian or something. I gotta find out about the payment, muttered Fergie, and when he turned to the next page, suddenly he could read again. Congratulations on your father's new job, Mr. Ferguson. You are the hero of the family, and they don't even suspect. Now you are wondering about what payment will be demanded for your wish. It will not be anything you will not be glad to give. It is very simple. You must promise yourself that you will be a good student, and this is the book you must study. Okay, said Fergie. Sure, why not? And he turned to the page. And then he just tore off for home, said Johnny. I tried to catch up, but he had a big lead. It's most odd, murmured Professor Childermass, frowning. He and Johnny were sitting in the professor's study, and Johnny had just blurted out the story of what had happened. You actually found a mention of that rapscallion Jarman Thanatos in the old newspapers? 3 of them, said Johnny, and they all tied him in to that little town in Vermont where Mr. Ferguson's car broke down. The last one said that Mr. Thanatos' nephew was raised in the Hannah Dustin orphanage right here in Dustin Heights. Professor Childermass pushed his spectacles up and rubbed his eyes. That old place burned down about the time I was born, he muttered. It used to be north of town on Plaistow Road. I think. He pulled his spectacles down and glared. And of course, when it burned, all of its records were conveniently destroyed. Sarah said the same thing. Nodding, Professor Childermass said, Sarah is a very sharp young lady, John. Well, I hardly know what to do next. However, one course of action suggests itself. I believe I will telephone my old friend Charlie Coote and ask him about the history of that miserable mountebank Thanatos. There is a chance that he was something more than just a snake oil peddler. He might have been up to something truly evil, and if he was, I want to know about it. Forewarned is forearmed, you know. The old man rose from his chair and went to the hall, where the telephone was. For some minutes, Johnny heard the rumble of the professor's voice, although he could not tell what the old man was saying to Dr. Coote. Then Professor Childermass returned with a puzzled expression. Well, John, something is rotten in Denmark. Charlie says he doesn't know very much about the story, but he does want to show me something, and he sounded pretty upset about whatever it is. I told Charlie I'd drive up this afternoon. Can I go with you, Professor? Asked Johnny. With a grim smile, the professor said, Of course, John. You and I have been through too much together for us to have any secrets between us. I'll go ask your grandparents, and then we'll set off. We'll stop on the way for lunch. Henry and Kate Dixon were happy to give their permission for the trip. Neither of them had been able to go to college, but they hoped that Johnny would attend some great university and become a world-renowned archaeologist. Both Professor Childermass and Dr. Charles Coote were scholars and university teachers who were good influences on him. Johnny sat in the front passenger seat as the professor drove his old maroon Pontiac north on Highway 125 into New Hampshire. Professor Childermass was not the best driver in the world, and occasionally Johnny grabbed the armrest and held on hard as they went careening around a slow truck or car. They stopped in a tiny little crossroads south of Durham because the professor had spotted a diner with a big green and white sign on the roof, Sam's Steakhouse. These places usually serve a good burger, pronounced the professor as he parked the car. The burgers were medium well done, juicy and delicious, piled high with tomatoes, lettuce, crisp dill pickles, and cheese, and they were served with thick French fried potatoes. The professor drank a couple of cups of coffee with his lunch, and Johnny had a Coke. When they finished, the professor dropped a nickel into the slot of the payphone and dialed his friend's number. Dr. Coote was already anxious because they were a little late, and Johnny and the professor drove from the diner straight to his old gray two-storied Victorian home on Pierce Street, a peaceful, quiet residential street in Durham. A tall, reedy man with fluffy white hair and a long, bent nose that supported heavy horn-rimmed spectacles stood in the door waiting for them. He was Dr. Charles Coote, a specialist in the folklore of magic who taught at the University of New Hampshire in Durham. Even on his day off, he wore a tweedy gray jacket, a pale blue shirt, and a dark blue tie with tiny white Luna moths on it. He ushered his guests inside, and they sat in his living room as Professor Childermass explained their interest in a man named Jarman Thanatos. When he finished, Dr. Coote leaned back in his armchair and made a steeple of his fingertips. "Now that is an odd name," he murmured. "Course it is," growled Professor Childermass. "And an obvious alias. Why, the charlatan might as well have called himself Dr. Death or Professor Doomsday and made it plain to the dimmest dimwit in the crowd," and Johnny groaned. "I should have caught that," he said. "We studied William Cullen Bryant's poem, Thanatopsis, in English last year, and the teacher told us the title meant Contemplation of Death. Thanatos means death, doesn't it?" "Bingo," said the professor, lighting one of his smelly black and gold Balkan-Sobrain cigars. "And under that nom de guerre, the rascal cheated my father along with about 100 other people throughout New England, or so the story went. He must have made himself a rich man." "Well, nothing specific comes to mind," said Dr. Coote nervously. "That is, I don't recall reading anything about any Jarman Thanatos, although I know something rather disturbing about a Thanatos. But I can certainly check out the name. You say he was active in Vermont, Roderick?" "Ellisboro, according to what John discovered, and he seems to have been most prominent in the middle 1880s, returned the professor, blowing a blue cloud of smoke. Dr. Coote looked faintly distressed as he waved the smoke away. Yes, I know the place. One of those scenic little villages that hasn't changed much in 100 years or so, tucked into a valley in the Green Mountains, where the mountain brooks sing lullabies and the nodding jonquils as they dream beside the limpid stream," snarled Professor Childermass in a sarcastic tone. "Charlie, we don't need a travelogue. We just want to see what you can dig up on this Thanatos, especially if it has anything to do with magic." "Oh, dear," murmured Dr. Coote. He stared at his visitors owlishly. "I suppose I should have expected that with you two involved," he sighed. "Very well, I will do my best. But now let me show you the very unpleasant relic that came my way 25 years ago. I had forgotten all about it until you called with your questions. It's what I think you ought to see before proceeding any further with this business." He rose from his chair, swaying a little, like a praying mantis, all elbows and knees, and went upstairs. Soon he brought back a wooden box, about 4 inches square and 3 inches deep. "Well, here it is," Dr. Coote said. "What's that?" asked Professor Childermass. Dr. Coote carefully placed the box on the table. "Look at the label," he said. Johnny craned forward. A dry, yellowed label had been pasted to the box lid. Written on it in ink that had faded to a dull brown, was the strange inscription, "Thanatos Mouse." Johnny heard Professor Childermass gasp. With a shaking hand, Dr. Coote prepared to open the box. "This was dropped off at the university some 25 years ago as a curiosity, he said. "No one knew what to do with it, and eventually it came to me. I have had this box on a shelf in a closet for years and years, and it hasn't been opened since before the war." He lifted the lid and turned the box over. Something grayish-white rolled out. Johnny blinked. The round object was a dead white mouse. Its ears were shriveled, its fur plastered down to its shrunken body, its tail a brittle-looking curl. The ribs showed through the skin, the lips had pulled far back from nasty yellowed teeth, and the ruby-red eyes had become sunken pits the color of scabs. It's a mouse mummy, he said thoughtfully. Dr. Coote produced a pair of sugar tongs and gingerly rolled the creature over onto its belly. I don't know if it will do anything, but just watch. In an unsteady voice, Professor Childermass began. Now look here, Charlie. Professor! Yelled Johnny. It's moving! Johnny felt the hair on his arms and the back of his neck prickle. The horrible little mummy was creeping forward slowly, its head creaking from side to side. From its mouth came a terrible, jittery clicking sound, like a finger slowly run down the teeth of a comb. The dry claws scraped the table. The wizened nose twitched. You see? Asked Dr. Coote in a sick voice. He reached forward to pick up the creature with the sugar tongs. It leaped. It jumped off the table and right into Johnny's lap. With a screech, Johnny lunged up from his chair, frantically swatting at the awful creature. It fell to the floor and broke just like a fragile cup. It shattered into 3 pieces: the head, the chest, and front legs and hindquarters. Dr. Coote looked down at the remains. It's just as well, he said slowly. Someone should have destroyed the wretched creature years ago. Gentlemen, that is or was the Thanatos mouse. I don't know anything about its origins. Dr. Coote! Johnny stammered. Look at it! It's still alive! The pieces of the shattered mouse were still moving feebly. The mouth opened and shut. The front legs tried to drag themselves across the floor. The back legs twitched. With a grunt of disgust, Professor Childermass stamped on the thing. And when he lifted his foot, the 3 pieces had been ground to powder and loose strands of white hair. Horribly, they kept stirring even then. The professor strode to the fireplace, got the ash shovel and a whisk broom, and swept up the powder. Charlie, he said, do we bury this or keep it for observation? Oh, dear, said Dr. Coote. Bury it. By all means, bury it. The 3 went into the backyard, where they dug a hole much deeper than seemed to be necessary, and they covered the dust over and packed down the dirt. When they had finished, Dr. Coote said, Roderick, could this be connected to your job in Thanatos? I think it is, growled the professor, but I'd rather not go into that right now, if you don't mind. Ugh, that creature is going to show up in my nightmares. Very well, I won't press you, said Dr. Coote. But do me a favor, please. If you find there's really some diabolical magic going on here, if Thanatos or his nephew is some kind of wicked sorcerer, I would greatly appreciate it if you would make your plans without me. I've had enough excitement already to last me a lifetime. My nerves aren't really very good. You know I have weak legs. Charlie, said the professor grimly, you just find out what you can and leave all the rest to me. To us, said Johnny in a small voice. After all, Fergie was his friend, and if Fergie was in trouble, Johnny knew he had to help him get out of it. If, that is, there were any way of helping him. Any way at all. And that is the end of Chapter 5.